from everyone and generally.
Hey everybody, just give us about 30 more seconds. We'll get going here. Welcome. Just about 30 seconds and we'll get started. Okay, let's get started here because we're just a little past time. We're live on Facebook. We're live on the webinar Zoom platform. So welcome everybody to sunny Tri-Cities. Unlike Ottawa, where it's a little cold out there, we're nice and sunny out here. Welcome Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce, our round town hall with Jagmeet Singh, leader of the NDP. So thanks for joining us. And first, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we're gathering today on the unceded territories of the Coquitlam First Nation, Katzie First Nation, Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So big shout out to all those communities out there that are joining us. The Chamber's role throughout the pandemic has been to support and sustain the business community. We've done that by providing timely and accurate information on what's going on with the pandemic, with the government, all those things. We've launched a Try Local, Shop Local campaign, which has been very successful. And we're in our last week of the Taste of the Tri-City series, so make sure you go and support our local restaurants. And we've been offering a variety of webinars and from industry experts and politicians like we have today. So we continue to be your source and your hub for training and for new information. Make sure you check back with us all the time. A couple things coming up just to make your just to bring to your attention while I've got you. On Thursday, March the 25th, we're doing our networking munch and mingle virtually online using a new platform. Make sure you check it out. It's free. And on that morning, on the 25th, we have Mayor's Coffee Talk with Mayor Rob Baggermoff from Port Moody. So if you want to talk about what's going on in Port Moody, join us on the 25th with Mayor Baggermoff. That would be great. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our sponsor, and they've been a great sponsor of the Chamber and of chambers throughout the Lower Mainland. Vancouver Port Authority, representing Vancouver Port, is our presenting sponsor. At this time, I'd like to invite Duncan Wilson, Vice President of Environment, Community and Government Affairs of the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, to join us for his opening remarks. Duncan, over to you.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be here on behalf of the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority today as the Tri-Cities Chamber welcomes Jagmeet Singh. I'm sure it will be an engaging discussion today. As I'm sure most of you know, the Port of Vancouver is Canada's largest port, supporting 115,000 supply chain jobs across the country and connecting consumers with more than 170 economies around the world. Over the last year, the global pandemic has underscored the importance of the port to all of us and to all of our communities. Workers in the supply chain, including terminals, railways, truck drivers, and many others, have kept Canada's trade moving, supplying products to people and businesses across the country at this critical time, while also maintaining strong Canadian exports to markets around the world. Last year, we actually saw trade grow through the port by 1%. While some sectors, such as cruise and automobiles, had very challenging years, other sectors continued to grow. Containerized trade was up to a new record, providing goods to businesses and people across the country, probably many of your businesses, while also providing export capacity for food, agriculture, forest products, and so many other Canadian exports. It was also a record year for grain exports, with a staggering 24% increase. As we look at economic recovery from the pandemic, the port is and will continue to play a major role in supporting good-paying jobs for so many Canadian families and businesses. In partnership with industry and government, we are investing approximately $1 billion in trade and transportation infrastructure here in the Lower Mainland. These projects will increase port capacity, reduce impacts on communities, and create jobs. As we expand trade, we also have a strong focus on reducing the environmental impact of that trade. Our world-leading ECHO program is reducing the impact of underwater noise on southern resident killer whales, with vessel slowdowns leading to a 50% decrease in sound intensity, which is increasing critical foraging time for the whales. We also continue to strengthen our Eco Action program, which rewards ships that employ the highest environmental standards with discounts of up to 44% off of their harbor dues. And we are restoring and creating new fish habitat to offset the impacts of port growth. Our vision is to be the world's most sustainable port by protecting the environment, supporting thriving communities, and driving economic prosperity through trade. Hopefully, some of these examples will demonstrate how we are working towards delivering on that vision. I'd like to thank the Tri-Cities Chamber again for hosting today's event. We're very pleased to be a sponsor, and I know it will provide an engaging opportunity for you and your members to meet with Jagmeet Singh. Have a great day.
Thanks, Duncan. That's great. And the port is very critical to all our small business out here. So a lot of people think, what's the port got to do with the Tri-Cities? Most of the goods that come through that you're selling in our local stores are coming through the port. They're working on transportation corridors out here too. So it's a critical part of our economy is that we keep the port going, and they're doing a fantastic job. Thanks for all you do out there, Duncan. It's very much appreciated.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, over to introducing our guest speaker today. So the leader of the Canada's New Democratic Party, Jagmeet Singh, is a lawyer, a human rights activist, and a former MPP in Ontario. Jagmeet understands the struggles Canadians are faced with because as a young man, he had to step up and take care of his family. He is driven to make sure government delivers for the people with stronger services that help create a better future for people. He is the MP for Burnaby South. So without any further ado, I'll turn over opening remarks to Mr. Jagmeet Singh. Over to you, sir.
Thanks so much. Honored to be here. Big shout out to the Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce and your head, Michael Hine. Thank you so much. It's been great to be able to connect with you today. I just want to shout out as well. I know there's a lot of attendees. Really appreciate all the business leaders that are on the Zoom call today. Thank you so much for everything you do in your communities. And in particular, in addition to your CEO, Michael Hine, I just wanted to shout out Benita Zarillo, who's a Coquitlam City Councillor, another elected official on the call, Finn Donnelly, who was my colleague in Ottawa and now is the MLA for Coquitlam Burke Mountain, Laura Deputy, who's the Port Coquitlam City Councillor, Nancy McCurrack, who's the Port Coquitlam City Councillor, as well as Brad West, Mayor of Port Coquitlam. So I just want to give a shout out to my fellow elected officials that are on the call. I'm really looking forward to your questions. I just want you to know that New Democrats are really committed that we've got to support small and medium-sized businesses. There seems to have been a really big emphasis on big business in this pandemic. A lot of the big box stores and big businesses have done very well, but small businesses have struggled often and often face a lot of challenges. So we're committed to putting forward a plan that specifically acknowledges the need to support small and medium-sized businesses. So we've got a number of proposals to help out, specifically encouraging the hiring and rehiring by covering the EI and CPP contributions by the federal government. We believe that will be an encouraging step, not only to help workers get rehired and to get hired for jobs, but also to help businesses as we get past the pandemic and demand starts to increase. We want businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses, to be ready to ramp up their operations by being able to hire workers. We know that merchant fees are often very difficult for small businesses, so we want to put a cap, and we want to continue the existing programs, the wage subsidy and the rent subsidy, for as long as we need to get through the pandemic. Those are some of the plans we have for small business. We are really excited to hear your concerns and your questions, and I want you to count on me as someone you can trust to work for people in this pandemic and moving forward, so we have a very strong economy and a country where we are making investments for the future and building a competitive edge that keeps us punching well above our weight as we have for a long time.
Thank you, sir. If anybody has a question out there, please put it in the Q&A here. I see there's a couple of questions out there already, which we'll get to. We do have a number of questions already sent in. So if we don't get to your question today, I will forward them off to Jagmeet's staff and they will get back to you with a response. So that's the way we're going to deal with this. You touched on a few things there. So we'll just start off about the recovery for small business. As we get through the pandemic, and hopefully there's a light at the end of the tunnel coming up in the fall. I'm going to say the fall just to be a little cautious. What are your plans to keep small businesses going and get them back going again? Especially the small and medium businesses have been really hit by the pandemic. What specifically does the NDP want to do?
Yeah, I think we have to acknowledge that small and medium-sized businesses have been hurt specifically. They've been impacted. We want to make sure we've got a sector-specific response. So we spoke to a lot of small businesses around Lower Mainland in BC, but across Canada, particularly tourism sectors, service sectors, anything where you need lots of folks coming together or traveling. Those are some of the hardest hit. Aerospace, lots of specific sectors that have been hard hit. So we need to see sector-specific supports. But we also want to see an acknowledgement that small businesses, medium-sized businesses want to be able to rehire once the demand is up. So we want to be able to encourage and support that. We also know that the more money we can keep in people's pockets, things that they don't have to spend money on, like medication and other expenses, if we can cover those through universal programs, then people will have more buying power to spend on in their local communities. So those are some of the ideas we have.
Okay, we'll get into some more questions here. But I'm going to go off one of the Q&A questions that was there. First one comes from Jason Zanata, who's really pivoted well. Nova Textiles pivoted very well during the pandemic and is producing N95 masks and had to go through a lot of bureaucracy to get up and running. And thank gosh he is doing that. It has been a real godsend for a lot of the government agency, especially locally. But he's asking about your position on the two Michaels.
Certainly, I think this is a travesty. We've got two Canadians, Mr. Spavor, Mr. Kovrig, that have been in detention in China for over 2 years now. We need to do everything possible to return those Canadians safely home. And the way we can do that, and what we've seen has worked in the past, is we've got to work with our allies and make sure we are applying pressure through a multilateral approach to return these Canadians to Canadian soil. And that's really our key focus.
So how about government relations with China going forward? What do we need to do to change the discussion a little bit, or do we, in your opinion?
Well, with relationships with China, it's one of the world's major players. We need to have open communication and diplomatic lines of communication. The past strategies of shutting borders or shutting communication with other countries has not proved to be effective. It doesn't allow us to achieve any goals. So we need to keep communication open. We need to have lines of communication, but what we really need to do is ramp up efforts around getting multilateral support to say, this is just wrong, what's happening to the Mr. Spavor and Mr. Kovrig. It is wrong, and they need to be returned. And so working with our allies is really the key. Having that multilateral pressure is the only way we'll get results here.
Do you think during this pandemic, I'm going a little bit off script here, that it's exposed that we rely too much on foreign production, and we should be encouraging more domestic production? And how do we do that, in your mind?
Without a doubt, that has been one of the troubles, or one of the big problems that has been exposed by the pandemic. The fact that we did not have the capacity as a country to produce really essential protective equipment and, in fact, medication. So we've taken a position that we absolutely need to make sure we maintain a robust manufacturing sector in Canada. There's certain essentials that we need to be able to produce. Personal protective equipment. There's no reason why ever in the future we should ever have a shortfall or a shortage of this type of equipment. We need to be able to produce it locally. The way we can do that is with government contracts. We can, for a very national interest, for the sovereignty of our country, have an interest in making sure the contracts are awarded to Canadian companies to ensure that we've got that supply chain in Canada. We cannot be at the whims of international logistics when it comes to something as important as keeping our frontline workers safe with the equipment they need. In addition, we've said what we had in the past in Canada was the Connaught Laboratories, which was a publicly owned Crown Corporation. We owned it as a nation, facility that produced vaccines and critical drugs. It was actually one of the leaders in producing insulin, and we were able to produce it at a very affordable cost here in Canada. We've seen that with this pandemic, not having the local capacity to produce vaccines has meant we have had one of the worst performances when we compare ourselves to other economies of similar size. In fact, smaller size economies have done better when it comes to producing vaccines locally and then distributing them and vaccinating their population. We would be in a better position if we had this capacity. So not only for PPE, but for things like drug and critical drugs and vaccines, we need to produce those locally. Also, we saw for a moment some problems in supply chains when it came to food. We need to make sure we are supporting farmers locally so that we've got a strong domestic supply of food the food chain did at the end remain stable, but there were moments where we were worried about that, and we need to make sure that we're able to produce enough food to feed our country locally and domestically.
So is it just a philosophical shift, or is there something that government can do tangibly? Because I know when one of like Novo Textiles, I mentioned them, when he could convert to, we needed mass, he could convert over, but going through the government red tape just to make it happen was just a nightmare, and he had to go out on his own and get it done. What can we do? Is it just a philosophical shift? Are there tangible things we can do to encourage this going forward?
Yeah, there's a three-part step. First off, government contracts should be awarded to Canadian companies. A buy Canadian when it comes to government contracts specifically related to our ability to remain a sovereign nation. So when it comes to medical equipment, protective equipment, we need to have a clear buy Canadian policy that encourages contracts to be awarded to Canadian companies. That's one. Secondly, when it comes to the ability to produce certain goods that we know would be essential in the case of a future pandemic, and we've heard from experts that this might not be the last, that this will happen again, and we need to be prepared. So those sectors should have a streamlined approach when it comes to being able to transition quickly to provide that solution locally and domestically. So I think we can speed that process up, make it easier, make that transition easier for companies. And then finally, when it comes to being able to be better suited to deal with the pandemic, we've proposed the idea of a crown corporation owned by Canada to produce vaccines and critical drugs, so that we're never in this position again where we, for a long time, we're waiting on shipments from other countries. We could not produce it locally. That should never happen. We can never be in a position where we can't produce a vaccine locally in our own country.
Agreed 100% on that. I totally agree. So a question that was submitted here is, looks like it's from MedRay, might be from Randy Webster, one of our past chairs. He says, hello, Mr. Singh. Thank you for taking time with today. You mentioned big business versus small and medium business having significant administrative resources, such as government relations departments, in-house legal counsel, and accounting, creates a huge advantage for large business over small and medium business. How does the NDP remove red tape and regulation so this doesn't continue this competitive advantage large has over small and medium?
First off, I really want to acknowledge that this is very true, not only when it comes to the ability to have entire departments dedicated to specific accounting or procedural or policy related responses. Larger corporations will obviously have the means to do that, which puts smaller and medium size at a disadvantage. Also, when it comes to taxes, we know that some of the biggest corporations that have made massive profits in this pandemic haven't paid their fair share and are able to use lots of creative accounting effectively to avoid paying their fair share. So we need to make sure that that there is a level playing field. So when it comes to taxation, we need to make sure big corporations are paying their fair share. If they make profits here, they need to pay their fair share here. And then when it comes to the approach we have in applying rules, there has to be an acknowledgement that small and medium-sized businesses are not in the same position to be able to follow some of these very complicated forms or applications that bigger businesses are able to do. Acknowledging that and making sure we have a streamlined process for small and medium-sized businesses. It has to be a part of our approach. We can no longer take a one-size-fits-all and thinking that the same policy will be applied equally. It will not be. If you're a larger corporation, it's going to be much easier to adapt to complex or lengthy procedures or applications, not something that smaller businesses or medium-sized can do. We need to make sure there's not a one-size-fits-all.
Okay, so I'm going to dovetail that a little bit because Claire McLean, she's the CEO of Share, which is probably the biggest not-for-profit out here, does great work in the community in all sorts of areas. Her question is, not-for-profit organizations are businesses, and they're taking up a bigger sector of the whole economy as every year they grow. And they employ a significant number of local residents and bring tremendous benefit to communities. Federal funding support is appreciated, but the administrative burden is tremendous, even for microgrants. What can the NDP do to put trust in not-for-profits, and remove the incredibly burdensome reporting currently required?
An interesting point, and we know that not-for-profits have gone through a particular challenge as well, as people were no longer able to many people lost their jobs, revenues dried up. For not-for-profits, they were having a difficulty in terms of their revenue streams. So it's been very difficult, and particularly when there's a lot of uncertainty in life, people hold on to their money and aren't willing to contribute in the same way. So lots of not-for-profit organizations have seen a really tough time. In terms of solutions, I'm willing to listen to and work with not-for-profits to hear them out. There's been some really interesting ideas around how we can encourage more contribution through more incentives for people who want to make contributions to not-for-profits. So I'm willing to hear folks out. And again, with the administrative burden, I know that this is something that not-for-profits have raised. I'm happy to sit down with not-for-profits and work on what those solutions look like.
Okay, so the next time you're out here, I would suggest you hook up with Claire McLean from Sheriff. She is awesome, and they do a fantastic job in our community, and she could probably give some really good feedback on that whole not-for-profit sector. And we have a lot of not-for-profits in our community and in the chamber too. It's a big sector of chambers, so that'd be great if maybe next time you're out this way, we could set up a meeting with the not-for-profits. That would be really good. Let me just go through some of these questions on here. Daryl Stickler is asking a question here. What are your party's plans to encourage investment in the sectors of our economy that are not related to residential real estate?
Right. So if the question is around investing in real estate or investing in development in terms of housing outside of residential real estate, housing is one of the things that we've observed before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and coming out of it. That it is a real crisis for a lot of people. They cannot find affordable homes or a place to live. And we've heard from business that it's also impacting business in their ability to find the right talent, the right staff. They sometimes can hire the right staff, but the people they want to work in their communities aren't able to find a place to live. And so there's a problem when it comes to the job market or the workforce. And so building and investing in affordable housing is also a job creator. People will be able to stay in their communities. They don't have to leave the places they want to live and where they want to work because they can't afford a place. So I want to see investments that encourage rental and affordable rental units. These can be not-for-profit, they can be cooperative, but they can also be supporting a business that chooses to make residential affordable places, rental places, their business model. We've suggested things like waiving the GST for builders that want to make that choice as an incentive, something that a lot of the building associations have said would be very advantageous to them. So we're open to that. Other sector specific supports, I mentioned tourism and travel and festivals are specifically hard hit that need supports.
Yeah, I think Daryl's just message here. He goes like, the question was investment in other, it wasn't really clear what he wrote there the first time, in other industry sectors. So how do we just get more capital flowing into to industry sectors? I mean, it seems to be flowing out, but how do we get people to reinvest back in Canada, have faith that Canada can deliver? I mean, how do we do that, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is right now we need to, the reason why I've been saying let's focus on getting through this pandemic, a lot of the uncertainty in terms of investment is coming from the uncertainty that flows from the pandemic. So once we get a strong handle on that, once we get everyone vaccinated, once consumer confidence is on the rise again, demand will go up and we'll see more investments. What can government do specifically? We need to invest in good infrastructure. The better infrastructure we have, the better we're connected, the better we can expand businesses. Internet infrastructure still remains something when we're talking about a country as vast as ours. I look at internet connectivity as an essential infrastructure piece. And the better connectivity we have, the more all sorts of businesses will be willing to make investments. You can open up a business in any community if there's high-speed, affordable internet. So those are some of the climate that the government can create to make sure that businesses are able to thrive.
So when you talk, just quickly, you talk about high-speed internet. I see today that Rogers and Rogers may buy Shaw, so now we'll be down to big three. Is that good competitive event? Like, does that spur on competition when we got the major internet providers coming together like that? What's your opinion on that?
I think it's a serious problem. We've seen in our country that we charge amongst the highest for our data usage. It's very costly. And there's a number of things that we can do with our spectrum to make things more competitive. What we've seen in the States, something that's worked really well, is a law that requires, if a company has infrastructure for internet connectivity or network coverage, that they are required to sell that to competitors who want to come in and provide a lower budget option. And it's worked effectively in the States. So the idea would be, for example, if Rogers has the network and a company wants to compete and wants to provide a very low cost option alternative, they're able to use that same infrastructure to set up their business. That's something that's allowed in the States, but it's not allowed here. That simple change would result immediately in increased competition and bring rates down. We need to do a lot when it comes to bringing the rates down. Look at other jurisdictions and see what's worked.
Okay, so and one comment here from Ravi is about many rural communities not having high-speed internet access, and is that something your government would wants to see addressed? And I'll segue on that a bit too about clean water in Indigenous communities out there. How can we solve this problem? It's been there forever, and I've got members asking about that. How do they care about it? They want to know how we solve that problem, making sure everybody's got access to clean water and high-speed internet.
Certainly on the rural internet, it is a priority for us. We need to make sure everyone in our country is connected to high-speed internet. This pandemic has shown it's not just a matter of work, it's also a matter of schooling for our kids, education access, services access, healthcare access. Everything now more and more is reliant on our ability to access the internet. And so we need to acknowledge that and make sure it is available everywhere at high speed so that everyone has access. And it's also an important infrastructure, like I said earlier, to help us be competitive and to allow businesses to be creative. If they want to set up an operation in a rural community, all they really need for a lot of businesses in this high-tech world is to have access to the internet, and that's enough infrastructure for them to set up an operation. So we need to make sure that's available. When it comes to clean drinking water, I don't buy any of the excuses. I've heard from previous Liberal and Conservative governments that it's hard to do, it can't be done. We are in the year 2021. We are one of the world's largest economies. We're a G7 nation. There is no excuse that we can't ensure that every community has clean drinking water. And it is my commitment to make that happen. If there's a new Democrat government, we will make this a top priority and get the job done.
Thank you. Let's see what else we got. So back on the internet, Jason's asking a question about Huawei. What your stance is on that? Should we be allowing them into Canada to provide services when many other governments are banning them? Where are you at on that one?
Right. Whenever we're up against these type of decisions, the priority should be the security and safety and privacy of Canadians. We've seen some very legitimate concerns raised about Huawei being given the 5G contract. So we've raised those concerns, and we're on that same side of people that have raised concerns. So we've said that this is something that we should take a position on. Canada has as yet not taken a clear position. We've suggested that there are a number of our allies that have raised concerns. Independent evidence so far has raised concerns, and so it does not seem like a path that we should be following. But again, these decisions should be made based on the evidence, based on a review of the security risks and an assessment of those risks. So far, it seems to me that that assessment would mean we should not move forward, and I think we need to take that position sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Keep the questions coming, folks. Keep them in the chat there or in the question and answer there. I've got a few here, but I'm still interested in hearing all your questions. So Ravi's asking about specific proposals of the NDP to encourage local food production and improve food security. We talked about food security earlier on. What specifically can we do, or would the NDP do, to encourage local food production and increase and improve food security among the vulnerable population that's out there?
Yeah, so for food security, we can look to some of the policies that do work. We know that supply management has been one of the key tools that has allowed us to have a very robust dairy sector. And it works. It works to allow small businesses or family farms to continue to succeed. So there's a clear connection when we've got good policies that support farmers that are able to then produce locally. And again, I want to look at this as a question of sovereignty. Our ability as a country to feed ourselves is very much tied into the ability of us to succeed as a country. And we saw, again, as I mentioned, some chinks in our supply chain. When we're only importing food, it has a drastic impact on our country and our ability to thrive as a nation. So we need to have good policies that encourage family farms, that allow for a diversity of farming. So it's not just the large corporate farming, but small farmers and small businesses are able to thrive. We know things like the wheat board in the past were effective. They were a big part of why we had such a thriving farming sector. So policies like that, we need to just make sure our policies are aligned with the outcome. So whatever policy we can achieve that supports farmers so that they can produce food for us locally is vital. One of the things that I've heard from a lot of agriculture sector folks is that there's a lot of volatility when you're in farming, a lot of uncertainty. You can't predict exactly what your yields are going to be year over year. So insurance and some certainty around what you're going to get in terms of revenue help farmers make those predictions for the future and make business plans. So whatever we can do to ensure there's more stability in pricing, stability in the uncertainty of the type of business it is, given that there's a public policy advantage for us to have a robust agriculture sector, we need to make those policies that align with that goal.
What do you think of the vaccine rollout so far? How's it been, from your opinion? What can we do better? Where is it going to end up? What do you think?
I think, and this, I don't take any pleasure in saying this. I am sad to say this, but Canada has not done a good job. Specifically, the Liberal government. This is where they've failed. We've seen a number of other countries far smaller in size and smaller economies that have outperformed Canada, and it's wrong that that's happened. And not to say that those smaller economies should have fared worse. I'm happy for them, but Canada should have done a lot better. And one of the key failures on the Liberal government's part, and again, I don't take any pleasure in saying this, but this is just the facts, is that early on in the pandemic, we knew that vaccines would be key to getting people feeling safe and secure, people who've got loved ones that are vulnerable, to make sure that they're no longer worried, that vaccines would be key. And we did not have the capacity at the beginning of the pandemic to produce locally. That should have been a red flag, and things should have been done, and investment should have been made immediately. We've heard from Justin Trudeau and the Liberals that say, oh, we were unable to do so, it was out of our hands. And I reject that, particularly because we've got some evidence to the contrary. In the UK, we had one of the experts, the leading experts that rolled out the vaccine or developed their vaccine capacity. He was on an interview at CTV in Canada and said, we were in the same position as Canada a year ago. We were not able to produce locally, and we made a strategic decision to ramp up so we had that capacity. It took us about a year, but right now they have that capacity because they made that decision. We should have done the same thing, and we had long called for this. The New Democrats had said, we need to be able to produce this locally. In fact, we said we need to be able to produce it publicly as well. But that was one of the major failures. And so the next phase is now going to be the vaccination. We might have enough doses, but what's the plan to get vaccines into arms? We've said that the military and federal resources should be parallel, working hand in hand with provincial governments to make sure everyone gets vaccinated. So what I envision is federal vaccination sites with the staffing of anyone and everyone who can be enlisted in getting people vaccinated, healthcare professionals inside and outside the military, and the logistics expertise of the military to set up these bases across Canada to work in parallel with whatever provincial efforts are being done. We can't take this for granted that just having the doses will mean that we can get everyone vaccinated. We need to ramp up the actual vaccination. There are some provinces doing a great job. BC is doing an excellent job, but we can do better, and the federal government needs to play a role.
I would agree. I think early on we could have targeted some money, some of that vast money we gave out, could have targeted to domestic production of the vaccine, and yes, now we would have been producing it right now.
Exactly.
Yeah, would have been 10 months to a year, and that's one of the learnings I really hope comes out of all this. When we look back, we go like, we need to have domestic production to keep our citizens safe locally, period, and full stop.
Absolutely.
And that's PDP and vaccine. Lots of different questions out here. Let me just go to one. I saw one from Ken Kuhn. he was talking about gas prices and why is there not more control over gas prices in Canada? Prices generally have nothing to do with transportation costs or planned government taxes. Fuel costs are affecting businesses, employees, and communities. Is there a role for government to play in the monitoring of fuel costs?
Yeah, we looked at this idea from the federal level, looking at transparency around how prices are being set and holding companies to account when we see some concerning practices. You know, a lot of folks know long weekend rolls around and all of a sudden gas prices always seem to go up right around that time. So there seems to be something going on, but there isn't enough transparency to actually identify what the problem is. So we can't say that it's price fixing, but a lot of times it feels like that. So what we've been looking at as a solution is greater transparency. It often solves lots of problems, but greater transparency around price setting when it comes to gas costs is an idea we've looked at, but we're open to other solutions. This is certainly something that's becoming a problem when we see a lot of volatility in the pricing. The other thing is we know that there is going to be a very big transition. It's coming. All the major manufacturers, automobile manufacturers said they are going to phase out combustion engines and moving towards renewable sources, whether it's electric or hydrogen fuel cells. So there's going to be a big transition. And to support that transition, which is where the global markets are headed, we need to actually build the infrastructure. So another thing, while we're worrying about the transparency around gas prices, is we need to actually build the infrastructure to support hydrogen fuel cells or electrical charging. There's a recent agreement between Germany and Canada around encouraging access to hydrogen as a source. And what's pretty amazing about hydrogen, it can be stored in quantity, so you don't have the same problem of charging and recharging. And the emissions of a hydrogen fuel vehicle is literally water. So pretty amazing innovations out there, but we need to make the investments now so that we don't have someone that buys a hydrogen fuel cell car or truck, but there's nowhere to refuel. So we've got to figure that out as well.
Cool. So I've got a question here from Fred. I'm assuming it's Fred Soupy. There have been a number of reports in National Post and Canadian press about dollars coming into Canada from a country talking about human rights, but hasn't got a great human rights record. And some of it is spent in manufacturing, in real estate, and farming, construction to create jobs. The question he has is, do you think because they are creating jobs and helping the economy, the government we should allow this to happen and not consider the source?
Very tough question. It always comes up for a lot of people, the concern between job creation and then ethical standards. I think that we have an obligation to uphold strong policies and principles around ethics and making sure that we are enforcing that and supporting that. The worst case examples are when we're not on top of ethics, we are supporting regimes that have very problematic human rights track records. And one right now, one of the glaring examples that we've raised is that we're right now with Saudi Arabia, we have an arms contract selling a light armored vehicle to Saudi Arabia, a country that is now one of the worst human rights violating countries when it comes to treatment of their own citizens, independent journalism. We all know the Kamal Khashoggi horrible incident, in addition to the ongoing war with Yemen right now. So lots of concerns, and that's an area where we should not be approving a contract. We can fulfill those same jobs and those same contracts with our own Canadian military. So there's things that we need to do. I think human rights has to be an integral part of our business practice and part of our work and relationship with other countries as well.
Thank you, sir. Question here is, we've experienced a booming film production industry in BC right now, and it's gone on since the early parts of the pandemic. They figured out a way to get going at least a few months into it. And the BC government taxation policy, a reduction of the elimination of some of the taxes, has been a driving force for that, and it's created a lot of jobs locally. First, do you support this initiative? And second, if so, what other industries would you support tax reduction to help investment?
Well, I got to say that the film industry and all of Canada has been really a big point of pride. We are becoming known as the Hollywood North, and it's been great for us. The dual benefit of the industry working in Canada is that it also acts as a bit of an ambassador for how great our country is. So it's kind of a double impact where people are not only creating jobs and filming here, but then people also get an experience of how great our country is, and it also will encourage, hopefully when the borders open up again and when travel is allowed again, it will encourage tourism as well. So I see it as a great win and great success. And BC has been doing an incredible job of incentivizing and supporting tourism that way. What I like to do when it comes to where we should be putting incentives is I want to think about where global markets are headed and how can we incentivize the right sectors so that we are ahead of the curve where the world is headed. So right now, one of the things that I see the BC NDP government doing, which I think is a great idea, is supporting entrepreneurs that have a social good with a focus on things that are going to help us be a competitive country for the future. Renewable energy is key. Renewable sources of rather transportation, energy production, home heating, commercial heating, energy in general. The more we can make investments in those sectors, the better it sets us up. We know that AI continues to be something that is talked about as a very massive innovation for the future. So wherever the world is headed, if we are able to make investments that we are going to maintain or create a competitive advantage, I think is a smart way to encourage investments.
There seems to be a lot of chatter and questions out here about wearing masks in open commercial spaces and public places. And they're asking your opinion on that, how we can better enforce that. I'm not sure you have much pull in that area. It's a provincial matter. We should all be doing it in public spaces. We're not out of this yet. But do you want to comment on that a little bit for us, please, sir?
Certainly, yeah. This is one of those things where I think we are a lot better off than our neighbors to the south, and most Canadians believe in following the evidence and the public health guidelines. So we could be doing a better job, but at the same time, we are better off than a lot of other places. So I think the business leaders, like everyone on this call, can play a really big role in just modeling good behavior. That when we wear masks and we're being prudent and careful, we are protecting not just ourselves, not just our loved ones, but each other. And there is an incentive in doing that because one, it's good to take care of each other, but two, it allows us to continue to keep an open province. In a lot of ways, I was able to experience the pandemic through both an Ontario lens, being in Ottawa a lot, and in the GTA, and then a BC lens. And for a lot of this pandemic, BC has been far more open than a lot of places because of how well we followed public health guidelines in BC and how well we did the right thing. And similarly, if we continue down this path, we can keep people safe, keep people able to move around, and businesses flowing. And so I think it's really important.
I agree with you. I think Dr. Henry's done a really good job of keeping that balance between businesses open, community open. We haven't gone through the big shutdown like most provinces have.
Right.
We haven't had to do that. So I think when you keep all that into perspective, we've done a really good job. Although we're not across the finish line yet, as I heard Dr. Fauci say this morning, we're the goal line's in sight, but we don't want to spike the ball at the 10-yard line when you got to cross the goal line. So we got to keep that in mind. Still lots of work to be done, but let's get across the goal line here with vaccines.
Great analogy, Michael.
Yeah, well, I won't. Dr. Fauci say that this morning. But I will say, we talked about the U.S. a little bit there. Yes, there's different. We've handled it better in some ways, but they did nearly 4 million vaccinations yesterday. I mean, their rollout seems to be, they've got it going, and they're going. And if President Biden said be open by July 4th, and at the rate they're going, they could have everybody vaccinated by the end of May. And whereas we're behind here. I know it frustrates people. I think it speaks to that domestic production piece that we must have here. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, and I think one of the themes of today has really been domestic production. It is so important. There is no way we can underemphasize its importance in all areas. Just the ability as any nation to be able to produce the things that you need to get through a crisis is just vital. And it can't be that we have to always ramp up during a crisis. We need to have the capacity in place before the crisis. And sure, there might be times where we need to expand that capacity, but there needs to be a baseline capacity always available in our own country for local production. And that's just one of the biggest findings of this pandemic is the idea of outsourcing all production has been a failure. That is a wrong decision that was made in the past, and it cannot continue. And so I go beyond just the PPE, and I really want to double down on our idea when we talked about the vaccines. Imagine how much more quickly we would have been able to produce and then vaccinate our country if we had the local capacity. Other countries that are smaller economies than us that were able to do that have far exceeded the vaccination, and they were smaller economies. They were able to get their population vaccinated. And imagine what that would mean, for families like when I'm back at home with my parents, they're over 70 and they've got health complications, and I worry about them. I can't go out and about if I know I'm going to come back to see them, and so I have to stay away from them if I'm going to be in contact with people. And what would that do to consumer confidence, knowing that everyone is vaccinated? We would immediately be able to be very free and open up a lot more, and people would be more confident in being able to go out to businesses and go out to restaurants. And so I think it's just very vital to look at this as a strategic business investment, a strategic economic investment, a strategic investment in our future, the ability to produce necessary items in our own country we can't emphasize it enough.
I agree. I'm not going to go there again. I've spent enough time on that one. I agree with you on that. Do you want to comment on the plan, the incentives that the federal government rolled out, the CERB and the rent subsidy and all those
Sure.
programs they rolled out to help through the pandemic? What's your position on those? Did they help out? Were they enough? Should we do more? Where are we at? And how do we wean ourselves off them going forward?
Certainly. So a couple of things. A lot of the programs that people really relied on, what we noticed in the beginning was that the Liberals were trying to do the minimum and we pushed them to do the maximum. So things like CERB was introduced at 1,000. We were able to double that to 2,000 to get people a lot of support they need. These supports were vital for lockdowns. BC didn't feel the lockdowns to the same extent, but for places like Quebec and Ontario that had really severe lockdowns, this was the way that lots of people who lost their jobs, millions of Canadians who lost their jobs because of the lockdowns, were able to keep food on the table. So they were vital. They were very important. We were there to make it happen. When it comes to the rent subsidy, a great idea, but from the beginning, the failure was to make it landlord-based instead of tenant-based. We identified that right off the top and said, this makes no sense at all. This program will not work unless the business owner, the tenant, can apply for it. If it's going to be landlord-based, there is actually no incentive to actually take up the program. And that's what we saw. It didn't work. So we fought to make sure it was tenant-based. We've got it changed to tenant-based, and it's going to be a lot better now. The wage subsidy, the purpose of it was to keep people employed. A lot of businesses were able to keep a lot of their staff employed because of the wage subsidy. So really effective. And paid sick leave was something that Premier Horgan raised, and I made it a requirement. We were not going to support some key steps forward unless it was brought in. We got it brought in. There's some problems with it that can be improved. It's not flexible enough, and it doesn't allow people to take a day or two off if they need to see if symptoms resolve, and it doesn't cover the exact salary that a worker would otherwise get. And there's a bit of a delay. So it's the first of its kind in the history of our country. It's pretty phenomenal that we were able to achieve that. New Democrats made that happen, but there are some improvements we want to see happen to it. So by and large, I mean, the presence of New Democrats have been being there in Parliament. Despite the fact we're only 24 in number, our presence has meant people got more help, has meant that small businesses got more help, and we've had a better response. Then moving forward, I think this is where we've got to be very careful. There is sometimes a tendency to cut off help immediately. What's going to happen is that will disproportionately help the big box stores and large businesses, and smaller businesses will suffer more. So we've got to make sure that we find a way to transition that doesn't leave small businesses in the lurch, that doesn't leave people and workers in the lurch. And that's what our plan is going to be, that we target our supports to those who need it most and don't cut off those supports prematurely, putting a lot of very vulnerable businesses and people in a really difficult position.
Okay. So that being said, when we get off this, we haven't had a budget in 2 years, coming up to 2 years, I think, right? Federal budget.
That's right.
The deficit's going to be large. We know that from the pandemic. I think people generally accept there's going to be a deficit there. The question is, how do we start to pay that down? I mean, is it going to be, my kids are going to be paying it down for years, my 20 something year old kids will be paying that down? What's the plan? What do we need? We need to pay it down. What's the plan? What plan does the NDP have to pay down that debt that's going to be there?
Certainly, this is a really big question, and I take it really seriously because while I really believe in investing in people and that these investments are crucial, I also realize that massive investments without any sort of increase in revenue is going to be very dangerous, and without understanding that the impact of the debt and the deficit is going to be dangerous as well. So we're up against two choices, really, or maybe three choices. What we've seen in the past is when we're faced with a massive deficit, governments then move into austerity. They cut the services and the programs that people need. And the outcome of that is that people end up suffering. So that's one outcome. The second outcome we see often is that the tax or the cost of this is put onto people and they have to bear the burden, taxes go up. So either there's austerity or taxes go up. The third option is what we're proposing. And that third option is one no other party is proposing. And we're saying, in this pandemic, we've got clear evidence that not only have some companies made significant profits, some have made record profits. And so much like in the World War, what we did is learning from our past. In the World Wars, there was a pandemic, or there was at the time a profiteering tax. What we're proposing is a pandemic profiteering tax. There are certain companies like Amazon that have made record profits. Well, given the fact they've made record profits, they should contribute more than they would normally contribute. That's what we did in the post-World Wars. We looked at companies that were making massive profits and said, because of your profits are well above what normally you would make, we are going to ask you to contribute a bit more. The other thing that we've seen in this pandemic is that the wealthiest Canadians, 44 of the wealthiest billionaires in Canada, have made $62 billion of additional profit. Their wealth has increased by $62 billion. So we are proposing that the wealthiest, those at the very, very top, contribute more to pay for the pandemic and the recovery. That's a revenue increase that would not put pressure on small and medium-sized businesses. It would not put pressure on working people. It would ask those at the very, very top to contribute a bit more. So we've got a host of solutions from closing tax havens, which is a loss of revenue for us, closing some loopholes, which again, a loss of revenue, a pandemic profiteer tax, as well as a wealth tax on fortunes of over 20 million. So we're proposing revenue that is not going to hurt our economy, that's not going to hurt small and medium-sized businesses, and that's not going to hurt workers. And so there is going to be a cost to this pandemic, but the question is who should pay that cost or who should bear that cost? I say those who are able to afford it.
Okay. Couple of questions, last questions before we close here. There was a question about the We charity scandal. And it's coming back up. I think they're going for a parliamentary committee this week, I believe. It seems to have been brushed under the rug a little bit or pushed aside because of the pandemic and things are going on. Your thoughts on the We charity issue?
So, I mean, this is an example of what's wrong when governments are making decisions that are not in the interest of people, in this case, young people, and instead in the interest of helping close friends. And we've seen that there was some serious conflict of interest raised and serious problems with what the Liberal government had proposed to do. And we need to know get to the bottom of it and have the evidence so that these type of decisions aren't made in the future. And I think it's very important. I think a similar trend we've seen is when it comes to the rollout of the vaccine and pharmaceuticals in general. We've seen a pattern of behavior where the Liberal government has benefited large pharmaceutical companies and it's not helped Canadians. So these type of things where we see a pattern of behavior where it's to help a certain interest group or to help close friends or self-interest, those type of practices cannot happen in government. And so when specifically right now we're up against the Liberal government has done this a couple of times now, we've got to get to the bottom of it and make sure it doesn't happen again.
How do we ensure it doesn't happen again? What mechanism can we put in place to make sure something like that, whatever they find, something happened there? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again?
Well, I mean, part of the problem is that if I could be a little bit crass for a moment, is that we've seen these type of scandals with both conservatives and with liberals in the past at the federal level. I would say one of the ways to avoid it is to bring in a fresh party, bring in new Democrats, elect them into party, and then we won't have those things happen again. And we can also look at some of the best run governments in terms of corruption free and well run have been New Democrat provincial governments have been very, very appropriate with their spending. So I would encourage that. But I mean, there are ways to make sure basic conflict of interest rules are followed. It's obvious if you've got close ties to a company, a not-for-profit organization, a charity, that you have to recuse yourself. These are basic principles that should be followed. All members of parliament know these rules, but we have to make sure that they're followed. And particularly with government contracts, this is where the biggest concerns are, that they're done in a way that is very vigilant and following through on all conflict of interest and ethics, that they have to be upheld to the highest standard.
I think we're just pushing up the end of time here, Jagmeet. So I'm going to leave. There's a few questions sitting out there, and a couple are not really business type questions, but you've agreed to follow up with a couple of those people afterwards on their questions about pertaining to the farming in India and some human rights stuff. There's a couple of our members who are very involved in those issues. Just confirm that we'll connect you and you can follow up with them in person. Is that okay?
Yes. Thank you so much, Michael. Yes, absolutely. Questions that we're unable to answer, we would be very happy to follow up with you. And I really appreciate the questions that are in the chat box. And we had a chat beforehand. Michael was very vigilant as your CEO, wanted to make sure that if folks, we couldn't get to everyone's question, that we were able to follow up. And I absolutely agree. That's a great way to do outreach and to answer folks' questions. I'd be honored and happy to do that.
I appreciate that because they are very passionate about it, and and they have they're very passionate about it, and rightfully so. But if you would talk to them one-on-one on Zoom and answer their questions, and in the near future, that would be fantastic. Thank you for doing that. So I'm going to give you the floor for a couple minutes to close up, and then I'll finish it up, and we'll get on to our sunny day out here on the West Coast.
Amazing. I was going to say, if I wasn't also a fellow West Coaster, I would be very jealous. But I know that I'll be able to make it out to the West Coast hopefully soon when things get a little bit better. Thank you so much, Michael, for your leadership and for the opportunity and for organizing today's event. And I know you're very proud of your entire team. So thank you to your entire team at the Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce for the opportunity. Thanks to everybody. I've been seeing comments in the chat. So thank you so much for participating in the chats and for the chance to speak with all of you. Thank you for your leadership in your communities. I know many of you, all of you go above and beyond just providing a business or a service. You also contribute and give back to your community. So thank you for that. And it's been an excellent opportunity to share some thoughts with you. And I look forward to having more conversations in the future. Thank you.
We appreciate your time. I got one last question for you. Fall or spring election?
Oh, sadly, I will tell you, it will not be because of us. We've made a commitment not to have an election. We think that right now the focus has to be on the vaccination and getting the vaccine out to everyone, getting people help. But it looks like the Liberals want an election and they're doing everything they can to get a spring election. So I think very likely a spring election, but it won't be because of me. We're in a good position, better than we were before, but we are not going to trigger an election. We're going to keep on making sure government works for you and your families.
Thank you, sir. That's a great way to end. Thanks everybody for being on the call. For those of you, I talked about Ravi and Fred especially, we will connect you with Jagmeet's office to get those questions answered, and you can connect one-on-one with them. I think it's important you do that. Thanks for everybody who's doing all of your hard work out there, folks. We're going to get through this. Like, we're not quite there yet. We're not across the goal line, so let's not spike the football at the 10. Let's get across the goal line and get this done. Have a great day, and as usual, if you need anything from the chamber, please give us a call. Jagmeet, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. When you're out here, hopefully we can meet in person.
We'll love it. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, all.